Welcome to By the Numbers. This is a new series where we're going to take a look at the 2024 classes. We're going to take a look at every feature of the classes and see, mathematically speaking, what does it bring to the table. We'll take a look at their damage, their control, and their survivability to see how much each feature gives. Also, we'll do a generalized build comparing 2014 to 2024 and see just how they stack up. Since we're going through each feature one by one and doing analysis on them, this means the video will be quite long. So feel free to jump around to the parts that interest you the most. We'll start by looking at each feature individually, then we'll move on to the build and the comparison to 2014, and then we'll do some overview and closing remarks. The first class I want to look at is Barbarian. Barbarians in 2014 had a lot of struggles past level 5. And in almost every instance, it was better to multi-class out of Barbarian around that time. It seemed like it was dead feature after dead feature that didn't bring you anything. Brutal Critical was one that people especially did not like. Also, besides damage, the class didn't bring anything to the table. They didn't have any social skills, utility, or control that they could do in the battlefield. So I hope that the new Barbarian can overcome a lot of these hurdles. I want them to make us interested in staying in Barbarian long term and feel like there's a good payoff for doing so. Make Barbarians interesting to play, both in battle and out of battle. That's all I want. Starting at level 1, Barbarians get Rage. This is their most iconic feature in pretty much any media. Barbarians get angry and they get a few really important abilities. This new version has been changed in significant and also subtle ways that really help Barbarians' quality of life. So the Rage we know and love gives us resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. It also gives you a boost to damage when you attack with strength. This one noticeably leaves out the melee attack restriction, meaning that thrown attacks with strength still get your Rage bonus. That opens the doors for a lot of great thrown weapon builds. You also get advantage on strength checks and saves, and of course, you cannot concentrate on spells and you can't cast spells. Advantage on strength checks might not be as useful in this edition as it is in 2014, because the rules of grappling have changed so that it's a saving throw when you first start a grab. So the differences we have in 2014 and 2024 are the thrown weapons now work with it, but also the duration of Rage has changed from 1 minute to 10 minutes. That means you can potentially span multiple battles with Rage. If you're in a dungeon, you're going room after room, it's very likely that your Barbarian can keep that one Rage through multiple battles, which is fantastic. The other one is that you can maintain your Rage as a bonus action on your turn, meaning that it is possible to actually stay in Rage between battles now. Normally, you either have to attack or take damage to stay in your Rage. Now you can attack, take damage, force a saving throw, or use that bonus action to maintain it. That means if you do something like Dragonborn's Breath Weapon, that forces the enemy to make a save, and so your Rage will continue. Finally, when you take a short rest, you also regain 1 use of Rage. All of those combined mean that the Barbarian is so much more likely to be in their Rage whenever they want to be. And that's really important because Rage is their primary thing. So it's not a damage boost or anything, but this quality of life improvement is going to be great for Barbarian players. So the question we can take a look at is how much does Rage actually help us in terms of survivability? Unfortunately, we don't have the new monster manual, so we don't know what the distribution of damage looks like across the damage types. But we can take a look at the current monsters and see what percentage of their damage is bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing at all tiers of play. Taking a look at this chart, we can see that at level 5, 60% of the damage we take is going to be bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. As we go on to level 9, 13, and 17, these numbers go down and down until it's eventually only about 35%. Now it does decrease quite a lot, but it is still helpful. If we had a Barbarian with 14 con and the tough feat, and they had a deadly encounter that was focused fire on them, this is how much damage they would take each round, and how long they would last based on that damage. So at level 5 they'd last 1.3 rounds, without Rage. With Rage, due to that damage resistance, they can last 1.8 rounds, which means they last 1.4 times longer. As we can see, the Rage resistance does less and less over time, such that at level 17, we're only lasting 1.2 times longer. As for Rage damage, it always has felt a little measly to me. You start out at +2 per attack at level 1, and you go all the way up to +4 at level 20. Feels like a very slow increase. But there is a boost from 2024. There's now a lot more ways to generate extra attacks. If we can make 5 attacks in one turn, a +2 turns into a +10, and that's not bad. Check out my Weapon Masteries video to see how to do that. And speaking of Weapon Masteries, that's the next feature we get. This is a really big and a great feature. It gives a lot of meaningful ways that barbarians can boost their damage or do other things in combat. Essentially, the way it works is you pick one weapon, every weapon has a mastery associated with it, and you get some ability, such as pushing or toppling or giving them disadvantage on their next attack roll, things like that. I like that we can swap them out on a long rest, so we can change out our tactics when we want. Right now, as a barbarian, we only have 2 weapon masteries, but that will increase as we level up. There are a lot of good masteries that work for barbarians, but the ones I think are most useful and powerful are Cleave, Push, Nick, and Sap. Topple, Vex, and Graze all have anti-synergy with barbarians because of Reckless Attack. In fact, let's take a quick detour to Reckless Attack, which is a level 2 ability. We'll come back to level 1 in a second, but Reckless Attack is pretty important to understanding which weapon masteries are useful. Barbarians can choose to give themselves advantage on every attack in the round by using Reckless Attack. The downside is every incoming attack has advantage on them. It's a very iconic and very strong feature that the barbarians get. There are 2 changes of note here. 1, Reckless Attack lasts for the round instead of just your turn. This means that you can get advantage on your reaction attacks, such as opportunity attacks. Number 2 is that Reckless Attack now can be used with any strength-based attack, so throwing weapons are now on the table again. Barbarians are gonna be great with thrown weapons. Okay, sorry, let's jump back to weapon masteries. The reason we don't want Vex is because Vex gives us advantage on attacks, and we already get that from Reckless Attack, so it's kind of useless. We don't want Topple because the main purpose of Topple is to get advantage from knocking someone prone. We already have that, so we don't need it. The last one is Graze, and Graze does damage when you miss. We have advantage on all our attacks, which means we rarely miss, so it has anti-synergy there. On the other hand, Cleave is probably going to be Barbarian's best friend. And I'm really happy about that because there are only 2 weapons in the game that have Cleave. The Great Axe and the Halberd. Basically just an axe on a pole. And I love that Barbarians synergize with a big old axe. So why is Cleave so good for Barbarians? Because Cleave, when you land one attack, it lets you have an extra attack on somebody next to them also within your reach. This means Barbarians are much more likely to land the first attack and the second attack. Also, you can use this once per turn, so when you have an opportunity attack, you can cleave as well. And since you have advantage on those 2, your cleave is still very likely to go off, if you can place them right. And Barbarians, later on, spoiler alert, are going to get good opportunities to push and rearrange the battlefield the way that they want. So their cleave is even more likely to be set up. So if we can generate more attacks, we have more rage damage. Push Mastery is useful because it can help you set up cleave. So you can start with a maul, push, and then switch to a Great Axe and cleave through. Nick might be a strange one to think on a Barbarian, but actually dual wielding Barbarian is quite good now, especially if you can get access to the 2-weapon fighting style. And a fighter dip is always good on a Barbarian anyway. So why is 2-weapon fighting great? Because it can generate more attacks, and with the rage damage applying to each attack, you can get so much. A dual wielding Barbarian can have 4 attacks by level 5, not including opportunity attacks. If you want to do some fancy juggling, you can have 2 weapons and a halberd that you juggle between. You can do 2 attacks, one with your action, one with Nick, a second attack with your halberd, which then can cleave, and then a bonus action to Polearm Master. So that's 5. And then with Polearm Master, you're very likely to get a reaction attack which might cleave too, so you could get 7 attacks in a round. Again, take a look at the Weapon Mastery video for how weapon juggling works. As for the Sap Mastery, because Reckless Attack is giving advantage on any incoming attacks, Sap can counteract that in some way to make a more defensive-minded Barbarian. What Sap does is it gives them disadvantage on their next attack roll, so that disadvantage and advantage will cancel out, meaning hopefully you'll last a lot longer. And this could be a good combo with a dual wielder with the Nick feature. The last level 1 feature, you get a lot at level 1, is Unarmored Defense. And this sets your AC to 10 plus your dex plus your con. You're still going to be better off going medium armor for the vast majority of the time. So, no change. Barbarian level 2, we already talked about Reckless Attack. The other feature we get here is Danger Sense, which is very close to the 2014 version. The only difference is the wording is changed so that it always goes off unless you're incapacitated. Thanks. Again, a nice quality of life improvement. A lot of damage does actually come in through dex saves. The unfortunate thing is that they're usually half damage on a save anyway, and we likely only have about a +2 to our dex. Take a look at this table. If a deadly encounter focused all their attacks on us, this is how much damage we would expect to take through our dex save each round. If we have advantage or no advantage, it's close. It does prevent us some damage though. Moving on to level 3. Of course, we get our subclass here, and the Barbarian subclasses are actually pretty good. I really wish we had time to go over all of them and see what they bring. Unfortunately, this video is just going to be so long as is, so we'll have to save that for later if people like. I personally really want to see the World Tree Barbarian in play. It looks really fun to play. But the thing we can talk about is their new feature here, Primal Knowledge. This one here is really helpful. Barbarians already have extra control through their weapon masteries. Now this gives some out of combat skill utilities. The way it works is when you rage, you can use your strength modifier to do some skills instead of whatever they normally were. The skills we can do this for are acrobatics, intimidation, perception, stealth, and survival. The idea is that we can embrace the predator aspect of the barbarian's rage. And imagine yourself as like a panther slinking through the woods, and you're taking on the stealth of that. Also note that we have advantage on strength checks while we're raging. That means you have advantage on all of these rolls. Now the barbarian of the party can finally be intimidating. I was always so annoyed that the bard was scarier than the barbarian. And remember, you can maintain your rage for up to 10 minutes using your bonus action for each turn. That's definitely enough time to do that sneak mission to get into the castle. I really like this feature. Finally, they won't feel useless out of combat. In fact, let's compare barbarians to rogues at this level. If we take a rogue with expertise in stealth, their minimum roll would be an 8, their max would be a 27, and their average is 17.5. That's huge. For barbarian stealth, our minimum's a 4, max is 23, and average is 16.8. So about 17. That's really close to a rogue. Your barbarian and your rogue are both going to be really stealthy. Later on, barbarians will get additional features that help their skills out, and we will do this comparison again. Moving on to level 4, we get our first general feat, and all general feats now give a +1 to an ability score, meaning that it'll be less punishing for us to take a bunch of feats. Let's take a look at a couple standout options for the barbarian. First one is obviously Great Weapon Master. This has been totally reworked in 2024. Now, instead of giving a minus to your attack roll, it just gives a consistent plus your proficiency to your attacks. And it only happens on your turn, so you can't activate it using a reaction or opportunity attack. I personally like this change. Now it's good for every class instead of just those that can consistently get advantage. Polar Master was a solid pick, and it's still a very solid one. What it does is it gives you a bonus action to attack with the haft of your polearm, and when somebody enters the reach of your polearm, you can use a reaction attack to hit them. Again, if you're using a halberd, this would trigger your cleave as well if you had it. The next feat is Crusher. It's also useful for positioning enemies. Barbarians are going to get a lot of that, but Crusher can even take that to the next level. Slasher's good. It can reduce movement speed, and it'll pair really great with the Brutal Strikes feature we get later on. Charger. This feat is actually useful now. What it does is when you're charging and you hit somebody, you can deal an extra d8 damage or push them when you hit them. Again, you can pair this with other abilities to push an enemy really far. The last feat I want to mention is Grappler. This is obviously more for niche builds, but it is a very solid pick now in 2024. Next is level 5, and here's where we get the wonderful extra attack. Actually, you probably already had a consistent source of extra attacks from something. Whether it's cleave or 2-weapon fighting or polearm master, something's going to give you extra attacks already. But an extra attack is always helpful. We also get fast movement here, which boosts our speed by 10 feet. Always helpful. Barbarians are much better at throwing weapons now, so closing in the distance to the enemy is not as important, but still very important. Okay, level 7, here we get Feral Instinct. This gives us advantage on our initiative checks, always good. In fact, this will pair well with abilities later, which will let us debuff enemies. If we go first, applying a debuff to help our allies out will be a great setup. The next feature we get is Instinctive Pounce. When we enter our rage, we can move up to half our speed. Again, this will really help the Barbarian close the distance as fast as possible. Level 8, we again get more feats, and we've already talked about those. Okay, level 9. This is where Brutal Critical used to live, and in a couple more levels too. And Brutal Critical is one of the most hated features in 2014, I think. What it did is when you crit, you would deal an extra weapon die of damage. Unfortunately, even though Barbarians are more likely to crit, it just doesn't happen a lot. And the damage boost you got from it was very minor, and it was not that interesting. What we get here is Brutal Strike, and it is much better. If you are reckless attacking, you can forego that advantage and any other advantage you would get, and instead attack with a flat roll, but you get an extra d10 damage, and you get to choose an extra effect of this attack. Right now we have two options. Forceful Blow, you push the enemy 15 feet away and can move up to half your speed up to them. Hamstring Blow, you reduce their speed by 15 feet. Okay, first thing I want to say is these numbers are 15. That is a very high push and slow. And remember, we have the slow mastery and the push mastery that we can use to enhance that even more. Push them 25 feet away or slow them 25 feet. And then on top of that, we can have feats that push them further away or slow them even more too. So if we hamstring blow them, slow mastery, and we have the slasher feat, we can slow their movement by 35 feet. Considering the average enemy has 30 feet of movement, that is a devastating hit to them. That's eliminating their entire speed. If they're an only melee enemy, this can totally eliminate their turn. And note that you can do this every turn. I could see it being extremely helpful for tanking. Instead, if you want to maximize the push, you can have the push mastery and the crusher feat to push them up to 30 feet. That is a massive distance. It's even better when it's paired with some difficult terrain or even something like spike growth. Barbarians can now play really tactically with the team. I should mention, you can only attempt one brutal strike per turn. You can't do it off your turn either. So the control effects are great, but does it actually boost your damage? Let's take a look at this chart here. We're using a great axe and we'll compare using brutal strike to not using brutal strike. Purely damage. Obviously, the lower the target's AC is, the more likely we are to hit regardless. So if we have that extra d10 from brutal strike, we will do more damage. At level 9, the average monster AC is 16. So actually using brutal strike does a little bit more damage then. But it's so little that I feel like the extra effect you gain is probably worth it. I think you're pretty safe doing brutal strike every turn without feeling a damage loss. Okay, jumping to level 11. Here we get Relentless Rage. This existed in 2014 and it's very similar here. What it does is when you get knocked to 0 HP, you can make a Constitution saving throw to instead go back to your Barbarian level times 2 HP. So at level 11, it would be 22 HP. Note that you can keep doing this, but your difficulty check for the con save increases by 5 every time you do it. So it brings you back to 22, which sounds good, but a monster at CR 11 will on average deal 25 damage to you through their attacks. So they could knock you right back down, and then you could do another save. But if you were knocked down by one of their attacks originally, then it'll bring you back up and you'll likely survive the rest of their attack. In 2014, this brought you back up to 1 HP, which felt pretty much useless. Now I have the numbers here for how likely you are to pass the saves and how much HP and the average monster damage at 11, 13, 17, and 20. So you can take a look at that here. The difference between the HP gets more and more extreme, but you are more likely to save as time goes on as well. So it kind of balances out, I suppose. Now moving on to level 13. Here we get 2 more options for our brutal strikes, and I'm a big fan of these ones. The first one is Staggering Blow. The target has disadvantage on their next saving throw, and they can't make opportunity attacks until the start of your next turn. The second is Sundering Blow. The next attack roll made by another creature against this target has a +5 to that roll. That's nothing to scoff at. I really like these two because they're built for teamwork. Now that Barbarian can set up an amazing turn for the next person down the line. And since we have advantage on our initiative checks, we're pretty likely to go before someone else. With these two, we can set up a great turn for the caster to do some debilitating effect. Or we can set up a great turn for the next heavy hitter to come in and almost guarantee a hit. Let's take a look first at Staggering Blow. How much more likely are they to land that effect? Here I have a table of modifiers to a save and the probability that that monster will fail the save given the DC is 18, which is probably what your caster's DC is right now. I've also noted what the average deck save, whiz save, and con save at level 13 are. So even that nasty con save goes up from being a 50% chance to a 75% chance. Your caster is going to love you. For Sundering Blow, I have a table of ACs here and the chance they are to hit without Sundering Blow, with Sundering Blow, and if they have Sundering Blow and advantage on the attack. The average AC for a CR13 monster is 18. So if they have Sundering Blow, the person now has a 90% chance of hitting that attack. And if they have advantage, it's 99. Even if you go all the way up to 23, it turns into a 65% chance with Sundering Blow and 87.75% chance if they have Sundering Blow and advantage. And note that advantage is pretty easy to come by in this edition now. Problem is you're going to have to land that attack first to even do a Sundering Blow. So the setup here is trickier, and it's probably going to be used a lot less than the Staggering Blow. I think pretty much every team has a caster with some debilitating effect, so they will love you if you do a Staggering Blow every turn. I do want to say you also can set it up so they have disadvantage on their next save to get grappled or to resist your topple effect, things like that. So if you're not playing with those kind of people, it still can be useful, just not as useful. I'm really happy with these. I think they're going to make for great teamwork, and that is, in my mind, a goal that games should have. We want players to work together to do some amazing things. Okay, moving to level 17. Now we get Persistent Rage. What happens is when you roll initiative, you can choose to regain all of your spent rages once per day. In addition, your rage now lasts for 10 minutes without needing to extend it at all. It's pretty close to 2014, but now you have the option to get those rages back. Personally, it feels excessive. Right now we have 5 rages per day and we're regaining them on short rests. I don't think we're gonna run out. Also, with the new options to keep your rage up in battle, I don't think it lasting for 10 minutes without you doing anything is actually gonna help. Probably only in the most extreme circumstances will this apply at all. So I think it's kind of a dead feature. The only real use of it I can think of is that some barbarian subclasses get access to features that you can expend rages as a resource to fuel that feature, such as the Berserker's Intimidating Presence. You can use it, and then you can expend rage uses to use that again. I just don't think it's gonna happen a lot. Let me know if I'm missing something. Alright, level 17. This is Improved Brutal Strikes. Essentially what happens now is when you Brutal Strike, you can choose 2 options. So you can push them and slow them, or sunder and stagger, whatever combination you want. Also, your Brutal Strikes deal an extra 2d10 damage instead of 1d10. There are some pretty great combos you can do here. Obviously, you can push someone super far away and slow them. That'll use up 40 feet of their movement just to get back to you, and you can repeat that every turn. That, mixed with our feats, mixed with our weapon masteries, there's so much fun stuff a barbarian can do now. This barbarian is getting options, things I can do in battle to change it. I love it. Let's go back and take a look at the expected damage we would have if we used Brutal Strike versus not, just from a raw damage perspective. Here we have a similar table as before. Right now the average AC is going to be 19. We can see that for virtually all ACs, using Brutal Strike is going to be better than not doing Brutal Strike. So if the damage is better and we get those extra effects, we should definitely be doing Brutal Strike every turn. I'm so glad that we're not doing Brutal Critical for the 3rd time in a row here. Ugh. Alright, moving to level 18. Here we get Indomitable Might. This means when you make a strength check, or save, if the result is lower than your strength score, not modifier, the result turns into your strength score. Essentially, from now on, you'll have at least a 20 in every strength check or save. Note that this pairs very well with our Primal Knowledge feature. Now you're going to get at least a 20 in any of those skill checks. So we compared the Barbarian to the Rogue before, let's compare them now at level 18. Rogue has a kind of similar feature that you can't roll less than a 10, and their minimum stealth score here is 27. Crazy. Their max is 37, and their average is 29.75. For Barbarian Stealth, we have advantage on it, but we also have a minimum of 20 now. So overall, our min is 20, our max is 31, and the average is about 25. So again, it's less than the Rogue, but they're actually pretty close. And if you wanted to, you could end up getting expertise on any of these skills too, which would be a huge boost. Okay, level 19. Now every class gets an epic boon at level 19. The one that's suggested here is Boon of Irresistible Offense. This increases your strength, lets you overcome bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing resistance, and when you crit, you can add your strength score to the roll. So right now, that's 21 extra damage when you crit. In a moment, it's going to be plus 25. So this is kind of like them getting their brutal critical anyway. Wizards, you gotta have that, huh? But it feels pretty cool. Let's take a look at how much the damage actually increases from it. Without the Boon of Irresistible Offense, per attack we deal about 14.2 damage. Now with it, we deal on average 16.3. So about a 2 damage per attack. If we have 3 attacks a turn, that turns into 6 DPR. That's actually pretty good. Note that next level on our Capstone, it'll be about a 3 damage increase per attack because our strength turns to 25. So in fact, let's take a look at that now. Barbarian Capstone gives you a +4 to your strength and +4 to your con. That means your attacks are more likely to land because your attack modifier is bigger, it deals more damage, you get an extra 40 HP, +2 to your con saves, and that means you're more likely to pass your Relentless Rage con saves too. If we want to take a look at how much tankiness we get from that +4 con, well, we can last around 0.3 rounds longer, which is definitely good. And that's it for the Barbarian base class. Before we make our final judgments on the Barbarian base class, I want to take a look at a generic Barbarian build and see what it looks like compared to the 2014 version. Note that this is not an optimized build. It's going to be a Barbarian with no race, takes the tough feat at first level, and is going to be using a great axe the entire time. I'm going to be calculating our damage in terms of DPR, but I'm also going to be calculating something I call combat space. Essentially, this means we turn that DPR number into a percentage of a deadly encounter. That means if you had a deadly encounter and you dealt this much DPR per turn over 4 turns, what percentage of that encounter would you take out? If your DPR doesn't increase for several levels, your overall combat space is going to go down because you are effectively taking out less of the encounter because monster HP is going up every level. Think of it kind of like damage inflation. You have to be continually increasing your DPR to have the same combat power over time. The hope is that you'll see a relatively flat line so that they feel powerful at low levels and feel just as powerful at high levels. So we start with our Great Axe, and we're going to say we cleave about 25% of the time. Once we hit level 2, we're always going to Reckless Attack. At level 4, we pick up the Great Weapon Master feat. At 8, we pick up Charger. At level 9, we'll get our Brutal Strike, and we're going to use the Push option here. Now, combine that with our Cleave, we're a lot more likely to get the Cleave off. So I'm going to say we have about a 50% chance to cleave at this point. Then at level 12, we pick up the Slasher feat. At level 16, we boost our Con. And at level 19, we pick up the Boon of Irresistible Offense. Obviously, there are a bunch of other options there that I didn't talk about, and I won't, but we're going to stick with this one. For 2014, it's pretty similar, except we have to allocate some ASIs to boost our strength. Now, if we take a look at this graph comparing the 2014 and 24 damage per level, it's mostly the same line, just transposed up. This means that, like 2014, we don't get a lot of boosts to our damage later on in our career. Yes, we do get some from Brutal Strike, but it's not a lot. It's mostly a feature that gives us control, not damage. So where does most of this extra damage come from? The majority of that extra damage is actually coming in through Cleave. It's 60%. Take a look at this graph here. If we chose something like push instead of cleave, the damage that we deal is very similar to 2014. But you know what's not similar to 2014? Our control. Now, control is a funny one. I have a method to measure control numerically. I call it control per round. I will put a link below. But essentially what it does is we take the unconscious condition and we give that a score of 100. Then we break down unconscious into a bunch of little subsections and we give each of those subsections a portion of that 100. Then we can use those little portions of unconscious when we do that specific effect. If you do 100 CPR, it's the equivalent of knocking one person unconscious per round. Let's take a look at this build, but instead of a Great Axe, we use a Maul and we use the Push Mastery. And we pick up the Crusher feat instead of the Slasher feat. We start out at level 1, because we're pushing people around each turn, is about 8.7 control per round. As we level up, get more attacks, that's going to increase more because we're pushing more. The Charger feat gives us even more push, so we're just going full into the pushing, forced movement here. Of course, we could switch to things like toppling or giving disadvantage, but I'm just going to stick to pushing for this example's sake. When we get Brutal Strike, we'll use it to push, and adding extra movement gives us some extra control as well. So that boosts our control to 40 control per round. As we keep going, we're going to pick up the Crusher feat, it gives us a little bit more. Then we have Brutal Strike, which gives disadvantage on saves, that'll boost it a little bit more. Then we get our improved Brutal Strike and we can do 2. Finally, on our last level 20, because we've boosted our strength, we are more likely to land these effects, so we can get up to 60 control per round. That is a lot for a martial who is focusing on damage. Casters can easily exceed 100 control per round at level 20, so we're not competing in that space. But we can have a large effect on the battlefield. Barbarians can do good control now. Compare this with the 2014 version control. Unless you pick up the Slasher or the Crusher feat, you can't do any control at all. Unless you're a grappler, in which case then it's pretty good. But you're not doing much damage then. Here, we're doing a lot of damage, and we are doing a lot of control. I'm really impressed with it, and I feel like Barbarians might actually be fun to play for me now. Normally, I also look at survivability, but the Barbarian survivability has not changed at all, except they will likely have the tough feat at level 1 now. So it's not going to be interesting to look at. Okay, so final thoughts on the Barbarian base class. I think it has been improved a lot. The quality of life here has been very helpful for Barbarian players. A lot more rage, a lot more often, and you get out of combat utility, and you have in combat control, you have teamwork potential with your friends. It's a lot better. The damage is pretty close unless you take a cleave weapon, in which case it's going to be significantly higher. If you want to just focus on damage, of course you can pick up something like the Berserker or the Zealot Barbarian, and they will boost your damage a lot more. So do I think it has addressed a lot of the problems? Yes, I think that the new Barbarian has addressed pretty much everything. There are good reasons to stay in Barbarian all the way to 20. I could definitely see multiclassing out at level 9 once you get your first Brutal Strikes, or 13 once you have that teamwork capability. There's not a lot you gain from that point on, but I think there's enough features after that that it's not punishing if you stay in Barbarian. Okay, that was a long video. Thanks for bearing with me. I hope that looking at the math behind all the features was as interesting to you as it was to me. I'm going to keep going through all the classes and see where they land. Next up, I'm going to do Fighter. But that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you have a great day.